The Federal and Devaki Specialty Hospital jointly present the Madurai Marathon 2024 Run for Health on Sunday, October 20th, 2024. Entry is free for all.
Hello and a warm welcome to Federal special program Capital Beat. I want to show you a story today, and that story was published in the Indian Express yesterday. This was a top headline story which says that government ignored NITI Aayog red flag that data protection law could weaken RTI. Now, this is a very significant story which Indian Express had published yesterday, and I'll tell you why. Because you remember when the data protection bill was in the consultative process, there was a lot of opposition from the opposition parties. There was opposition from the civil society saying that this would weaken the RTI Act. But the government didn't listen to it. But now this story of Indian Express says that the government faced a pushback from NITI Aayog themselves. NITI Aayog is a government think tank. And if the bureaucrats within NITI Aayog felt that this law, that is the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, if it is passed in the present form, it will weaken the RTI Act. And there is a proper dateline which is given. And according to the report in the Indian Express, in January 2023, NITI Aayog bureaucrats had flagged this issue. Then this issue was referred to the Department of Personnel and Training, and they didn't pay heed over it. So basically, now it is proven that the data protection law, which was passed, now it's a law. It has already been passed by the parliament. So how it will tend to weaken the RTI Act, which means that the government think tank, this report says, and this report is based on the sources which have spoken to the bureaucrats in the NITI Aayog, and they have said that this law, that is the data protection law, definitely will weaken the RTI Act. Now, what does this report now definitely mean? That has the government stopped listening to its own think tank? What will happen to the RTI Act? And now, does it lead to a situation where the data protection law or the Digital Personal Data Protection Act should be repealed? Should there be growing chorus on this as well? Joining me now is renowned social activist Harsh Mandar. Thank you so much, Harsh, for joining. I'm sure you must have read this story in Indian Express. And this story itself is very, very significant. What would you really say as far as the RTI Act is concerned, and also the Data Protection Act, which the government has passed? So now, are there reasons for us to believe that, government has not been listening to NITI Aayog themselves?
See, the government, the people who, there's a very small group of people quite clearly who make decisions, and they have been making decisions through the past years. And they function in a way which is completely non-consultative. I mean, they haven't listened to their bureaucrats, but in many instances, it's quite clear that they never consulted even with the cabinet, with chief ministers. So you had, decisions like demonetization and the lockdown and GST and so on and so forth, and many other laws that have proved extremely controversial. And I think this is just one more example where a set of people at the top have decided that they want to ram through this law, which uses actually what sounds very progressive, the protection of personal information, in order to actually weaken the citizens' right to information. And I've been part of the movement for the right to information right from the time I was a civil servant myself. And I do believe that in some ways it is probably the most fundamental law to deepen India's democracy. And it's pretty unique. And because we have an international audience, I do want to say that India is unique in that the demand for the right to information did not come from the media journalists. It didn't come from experts at a more professional level. It came from ordinary people, and it is ordinary people who fought for this right. And it's about 6 million people who every year are exercising this right. And we often say democracy is about the rule of the people, by the people. This actually gives you, I mean, you're the real ruler. You have the right at least to ask information from from people whom you have allowed, and you've given them the authority, but you have given them the authority. You are still the ruler as ordinary people. And therefore, you must have the right to ask them, why did you take this decision? I want to have every detail about it. And the power of this right is actually is evidenced most of all by just simply the enormous numbers. And when you look at the studies, something like 90% of the people who apply under the RTI are people who are officially registered as below poverty line. So it's India's large mass of poor people who are actually using this right. And it's a right that makes this government, any government, but this government in particular, uncomfortable, because they're uncomfortable with the idea that ordinary people can ask us. And those of us who were part, and I was one of them with the drafting of this act, the bringing in of even file noting. So you not only what decision was taken, but how was that decision taken, who consented, who dissented. It's a lot of information that you are getting. And there are no limits. We said that any information that a member of parliament can ask, a citizen must also be allowed to ask. So it gave a very wide kind of authority. Now it is that this large, expansive imagination of democracy that I think this government is trying to erode. And this is a very sort of interesting example. And just off the track, I often find how you use double speak. So you're having a huge number of the Constitution on a completely different issue gives you the right not just to follow your religion, but also to propagate it. And that was thought through by the members of the Constituent Assembly. You're now having a number of laws that are increasingly constraining your right to convert to a new religion, but you're calling it Freedom of Religion Act. I think it's the same kind of irony that you're using a progressive framework that we're trying to protect your personal data.
But I want to tell my viewers, just to people who have not read this Indian Express report, the report says that on January 16th, 2023, the NITI Aayog formally wrote to the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, urging it not to pass the proposed law in its current form as it would weaken the RTI Act, and suggested the bill be amended and fresh opinion sought. Records reviewed by the Indian Express as part of an RTI application showed. So the Indian Express filed an RTI. They must have spoken to the bureaucrats, and that's how they have come to the conclusion that the government has not heard their own think tank who had cautioned them long time back. Now, what do you feel should be the way forward now? Because the act has already been passed. It's a law now. Of course, the rules haven't been notified. Now, just like we have seen, Harsh, that the Waqf bill has been sent to a joint select committee. Then on the lateral entry also, there is a U-turn by the government. So can the opposition now put pressure so that the rules for this digital personal protection law should not be notified, at least in the present form? Can the opposition do that? And should this be the way forward?
See, for 10 years, the truth is that we functioned as though we don't have a parliament. Because of the numbers and the way decisions were taken, really far-reaching, legislations. The most recent of which was, of course, an entire amendment of our entire criminal laws and the amendments. You pass it, you suspend large numbers of opposition members of parliament, and you just ram it through without any kind of discussion. So this particular legislation, the data protection legislation, is also in the same category of legislations that have been rammed through. I think, it's a difficult task. I mean, where you should be able to go to is the judiciary. And the judiciary was there, that when the executive uh, uh, sort of encroaches on the powers of the legislature, then you go to the judiciary in order to get redress. The sad part is that, I mean, the judiciary has not reliably played this role. So I do still feel that this is a matter of such sort of profound significance. The right to information has been deemed to be a fundamental right. It's an extension of the right to life, and an encroachment of this kind. I think the judiciary needs to intervene. But I do also believe that you cannot just rely on the judiciary. The opposition parties should come together. Rulemaking is complicated because rulemaking is supposed to be what is called delegated legislation. So once a law is passed by Parliament, the government does have the power without going back to Parliament to draft rules. So strictly speaking, it is now within the jurisdiction of the government to make any rules that it wants, because the law has been passed by Parliament.
But given the mandate which the government has now, and they will have to withstand a lot of pressure if these rules they notify, then can the opposition put pressure on the government not to notify these rules? Because it does seem very, very clear now that it is weakening the RTI Act.
No, Nilu, I mean, they should do it. I'm just saying that it's complicated. It's complicated, but because in a strictly technical sense, because the law has been passed, unless rule making is the jurisdiction of the state. So
Right.
so that's why I imagine going to the judiciary as well. But just for your viewers, I do want to underline that this concern about protection of personal data. That's of course, personal data should be protected. Uh, suppose I have an ailment. Suppose I have HIV/AIDS, and I'm holding high public office. It's nobody's concern that I have HIV/AIDS, and if somebody tries to go out and seek this information, it is not. There's no demonstrable public interest in this information. But suppose I've accumulated wealth well beyond my known sources of income. I cannot claim that, if you inquire about my wealth, that is personal data that needs to be protected. So there's already a provision in the RTI Act that such personal information which is not linked to any demonstrable public interest cannot be sought. You didn't need a new law to legitimately protect personal information. So quite clearly, and one more thing that I'd like to add is that there's a particular amount of what I would call bad faith, because the problem with the present government that many of us are facing, including myself, is the enormous degree of surveillance that this government is doing. I mean, I have all sorts of cases being generally thrown at me and investigated. But officials have gone through every single financial transaction that I've done for the last 15 years. What kind of public interest is served by, and the kinds of questions that they ask about this. So it's a law in particularly bad faith, because on the one hand, we are having levels of surveillance that is unprecedented, I think, right through the period, including probably the emergency, because we didn't have such technology at that time. So you're actually penetrating into personal data in a way that you never imagined before. And now you're saying, in order to protect personal data, we are stopping your right to ask questions under the right to information.
So my last question to you, Harsh, is that so what do you feel that should the Digital Data Protection Act, should it be repealed? Should it be thought over again? What would you say?
I feel that this law and various other laws, I mean, the huge problems with the criminal justice laws, for instance, the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, etc., that's been made. I think that there's a larger strategy that we'll have to sit together in this extraordinary situation. That we've had a government which has rammed through uh, uh, very, very significant laws without both what is, the principle of pre-legislative consultation. You should actually consult transparently with citizens, with certain groups, have public discussions. Then you should have a clear, free
Absolutely.
discussion in Parliament.
But
And
one quick question. DOPT, that is the Department of Personnel and Training, which does implement the RTI Act and everything. And they were the ones not to respond because NITI Aayog wrote to them and they purposely overlooked this entire aspect that, how it weakens the RTI Act. What does it really go to show? And what does it show about the intentions of the government? Very briefly, and then we'll end the program.
I think it doesn't require a very sophisticated sort of analysis. It's quite clear that the government and its has selected bureaucrats who do not question, and that you have the small coterie which is taking decisions. You have a set of bureaucrats whose job is to actually give honest advice, which they are not doing, and therefore the government is able to push through this kind of ram through legislation without public consultation and true parliamentary consent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Harsh, for joining and giving your perspective. And one appeal to the viewers who are watching this interview, subscribe to our channel, send us your feedback, and stay tuned to The Federal. Thank you.
The Federal and Devaki Specialty Hospital jointly present the Madurai Marathon 2024 Run for Health on Sunday, October 20th, 2024. Entry is free for all.